take a deep breath while you still can. Let's dive headfirst, metaphorically, into the 10 most disgusting jobs in medieval history. Alright, kicking off our list at number 10, we have a job that's guaranteed to make your skin crawl. Quite literally, the leech collector. Before hypodermic needles and fancy pharmaceuticals, if you were feeling a bit peaky in the medieval period, there was a good chance your doctor would prescribe a good old-fashioned bloodletting, and guess who supplied the little suckers for the job? The leech collector's day-to-day was, shall we say, immersive. Their primary task? To wade into murky, stagnant ponds, bogs, and marshes. Lovely, right? And entice leeches to attach themselves. And how did they entice these bloodthirsty worms? Often, by using their own legs as bait. They are knee-deep in swamp water, just waiting for those delightful little vampires to latch on. Once a sufficient number had made themselves at home, the collector would carefully pluck them off and pop them into a jar. The disgusting factor here is pretty self-explanatory. Slimy creatures feasting on your blood, the constant dampness, the delightful aroma of stagnant water, and the high chance of picking up some nasty infections from either the leeches or the fetid environment. Tools of the trade were basic: a container for their wriggly harvest, and, well, their own increasingly perforated limbs. Socially, leech collectors weren't exactly hobnobbing with the nobility. It was a poorly paid job, often undertaken by the elderly or those desperate for any kind of income. Besides the obvious blood loss and risk of infection, hypothermia from spending hours in cold water was a real danger. It's almost ironically tragic, risking your health to collect tools meant to improve others' health based on the then popular humoral theory, which dictated that balancing the body's humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, was key to wellness. So next time you swat a mosquito, spare a thought for these unsung and very itchy heroes of medieval medicine. Slithering into our number 9 spot, we have a profession that was absolutely crucial for any medieval town hoping not to be completely overrun by tiny, furry, disease-ridden freeloaders: the rat catcher. Now, if you think seeing a single mouse skitter across your kitchen floor is cause for alarm, imagine entire cities where rats were practically co-tenants, sharing your bread, your bed, and probably your deepest anxieties. The rat catcher's job description was pretty straightforward: reduce the rodent population. This meant venturing into the grimiest alleys, the darkest cellars, and the most refuse-strewn corners of town, basically all the 5-star rat resorts. They'd be dealing with live rats, dead rats, and probably some rats that were still debating which category they belonged to. The disgusting part? Oh, just the constant proximity to creatures known for carrying filth and disease. The delightful possibility of being bitten by a cornered, plague-flecked rodent, and the general miasma of decay that often accompanied their furry quarry. Their toolkit was varied. They might use crude traps, sometimes unreliable poisons, which you'd then have to find the poisoned, decomposing rat later, or even employ terriers or ferrets, nature's own furry little rat-seeking missiles. Socially, rat catchers were a necessary evil. Nobody wanted rats, so someone had to deal with them, but you probably weren't inviting the local rat guy over for Sunday dinner. The pay was likely meager, and the risks were significant. Apart from nasty bites that could easily get infected, the biggest, scariest occupational hazard was, of course, the fleas hitching a ride on their ratty hosts. Fleas that could carry the Black Death. Talk about a high-stakes game of cat and, well, rat. Some enterprising rat catchers would even put on public displays of their vermin-dispatching prowess or sell dubious rat-proof charms. Because when you're facing a tide of tiny teeth, you'll try anything, right? Coming in at number 8 is a job that really puts your average laundry day into perspective: the fuller. Now, fulling might sound like a rather pleasant, perhaps even fulfilling occupation. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Fullers were crucial to the medieval textile industry, responsible for cleaning and thickening woolen cloth to make it more durable and water-resistant. Sounds harmless enough, doesn't it? But the medieval world had a secret ingredient for its industrial-scale cleaning needs. The primary task of a fuller was to tread, stomp, and generally pummel raw, greasy wool or newly woven cloth in large vats. And what was in these vats, you ask, to get that lanolin and dirt out? A lovely, warm, alkaline solution, often made from stale human urine. Yes, you heard that correctly. Large quantities of wee were collected. Sometimes households would save it, other times it was bought specifically for its ammonia content, which acted as a degreaser and cleanser. So imagine your workday. Hours spent barefoot, stomping around in a lukewarm bath of other people's pee mixed with sheep grease and dirt. The sheer, pungent aroma alone would be enough to make your eyes water, never mind the delightful sensation of squelching through that concoction. Their tools were primarily their own feet, though sometimes wooden hammers or mallets were used. Socially, fullers were part of an essential trade, and guilds of fullers existed, so they weren't complete outcasts. But let's be honest, you could probably smell a fuller coming from a mile off. The health risks included all sorts of nasty skin conditions, from prolonged exposure to urine and filth, plus potential respiratory issues from the fumes. Though fuller's earth, a type of absorbent clay, was also sometimes used, urine was the cheap, readily available, and surprisingly effective option. So the next time you complain about sorting socks, just remember the fullers, wading through medieval Europe's biggest communal urinal for your eventual cozy woolen jumper. Stepping cautiously into our number 7 spot, we encounter the tanner. Now, leather was an incredibly important material in the medieval world. Think shoes, belts, armor, saddles, bookbindings, the list goes on. But the journey from a raw animal hide to a supple piece of leather? Oh boy, was it a stomach-churning, nose-assaulting, gag reflex testing process. If you had a sensitive sniffer, this was definitely not the career path for you. A tanner's workshop was a symphony of stench. First, they had to remove any lingering flesh and hair from the animal skins. This delightful task often involved soaking the hides in lime, or letting them putrefy slightly to loosen the hair, which was then scraped off. But the real olfactory horror show came with the tanning process itself. To make the hides durable and prevent them from rotting, they were soaked in various charming concoctions. These could include vats filled with a lovely slurry of water, animal brains, stale beer, or, most notoriously, animal feces, particularly dog or bird droppings, which contained enzymes that helped break down the hide and make it pliable. And yes, often urine was involved too, because why not add another layer to the fragrant fun? Imagine spending your days surrounded by rotting flesh, animal waste, and the chemical funk of the tanning agents. The air in a tannery was famously, legendarily, eye-wateringly foul, which is why tanneries were almost always located on the outskirts of towns, preferably downwind. Despite the utterly repulsive nature of the work, tanners were vital craftsmen, and could actually become quite prosperous. However, the health risks were severe. Anthrax, a deadly bacterial infection also known as wool sorter's disease, was a constant threat from handling infected animal hides, not to mention various skin diseases and infections from nicks and cuts in such a bacterially rich environment. So the next time you admire a pair of leather boots, remember the tanner, who truly suffered for his art, and for your footwear. Dragging itself into our number 6 position is a job that was messy, smelly, and generally avoided by anyone with a choice: the knacker, sometimes also known as a flayer. Now, if your beloved steed, Bessie the cow, or even just a random stray dog kicked the bucket in the middle of town, you couldn't exactly call medieval animal control for a neat and tidy pickup. Nope, that grim task fell to the knacker. The knacker's primary role was the disposal of dead, dying, or diseased animal carcasses: horses, cattle, pigs, dogs, you name it. This wasn't just a case of digging a hole. These animals were often valuable, even in death. The knacker would flay the animal, as the hide could be sold to tanners, our fragrant friends from number 7. Bones might be ground down for fertilizer or other uses, and fat could be rendered for tallow to make candles or soap. So it was a full-service, albeit gruesome, recycling operation. The disgusting element? Imagine hauling around and dismembering large, often rotting, maggot-infested animal bodies. The stench of decomposition would have been absolutely overpowering, clinging to them like a second skin. It was a physically demanding job, involving heavy lifting, hacking, and sawing, all while surrounded by gore and decay. Socially, knackers were pretty far down the ladder, often ostracized, and viewed with revulsion. Their work associated them with death, disease, and filth, and their yards were, understandably, places most people avoided. The health risks were enormous. They were constantly exposed to zoonotic diseases, that's diseases transmissible from animals to humans, like anthrax, brucellosis, and goodness knows what else. One wrong cut with a flensing knife in that environment could lead to a fatal infection. While they provided an essential service by removing potentially infectious carcasses from public spaces, it was a thankless, perilous, and deeply unpleasant way to earn a crust. So next time you see roadkill, just be glad you don't have to take it home and turn it into soap. Slicing its way into our number 5 spot is a profession that truly blurred the lines between grooming and gore, the barber surgeon. In the medieval period, the same friendly chap who gave you a neat trim and a shave was also your go-to guy for having a troublesome tooth yanked, a boil lanced, or even a limb lopped off. Talk about a diversified skill set. Why the combo? Well, university-trained physicians often considered surgery and other manual procedures to be beneath them. Barbers, already skilled with sharp instruments, stepped in to fill the gap. Their repertoire included bloodletting, a wildly popular treatment for almost everything, cupping, setting broken bones, dressing wounds, and those dreaded extractions. The disgusting factor here is pretty blatant. Constant, up-close and personal exposure to blood, pus, diseased flesh, and the general unpleasantness of unanesthetized medical procedures. Imagine the screams, the smells of infection, and the very real possibility of things going horribly septically wrong. Hygiene wasn't exactly a top priority, so tools were often wiped on an apron, if you were lucky, before being used on the next unfortunate soul. While barber surgeons were recognized tradesmen and part of guilds, they weren't held in the same esteem as learned physicians. They were seen more as skilled craftsmen, albeit ones dealing with some pretty grisly materials. The risks for the barber surgeon included contracting diseases from their patients and the general stress of inflicting pain, even if it was in the name of healing. For the patient, well, the risks were even higher. Infection was rampant, and a simple procedure could easily turn fatal. And that iconic red and white barber's pole? It's believed to symbolize bloody bandages, with the white representing the clean bandages and the red, well, you get the picture. So next time you're in the barber's chair, just be thankful they're only reaching for the clippers, not the bone saw. Digging deep into our list at number 4, we unearth the unenviable role of the gravedigger. Now, burying the dead has always been a necessary, if somber, task. But in the medieval period, particularly during the frequent and devastating outbreaks of plague like the Black Death, this job took on a whole new level of horror and desperate urgency. It wasn't just about individual plots. It was about mass disposal on an almost unimaginable scale. The primary duty, of course, was excavating graves. But when the plague swept through, turning vibrant towns into charnel houses, gravediggers faced an unrelenting tide of death. They weren't just digging for one. They were digging vast plague pits to accommodate hundreds, sometimes thousands of victims. The disgusting element is tragically clear. Constant, direct contact with decomposing bodies, many of whom had succumbed to horrific infectious diseases. Imagine the overwhelming stench of death, the sight of countless corpses, and the sheer physical and emotional toll of handling so much human tragedy. They'd often work day and night, using simple shovels and carts, to try and keep up with the mounting death toll. Socially, gravediggers were always somewhat on the periphery, associated with death and mourning. During epidemics, however, they became both essential and deeply feared. Essential because someone had to do it. Feared because they were constantly surrounded by the disease everyone else was desperately trying to avoid. The risk of contracting the plague themselves was astronomically high. Many gravediggers would have inevitably succumbed to the very pestilence they were trying to contain. It was a job born of grim necessity, often filled by the desperate or those who had perhaps already lost everything. A truly bleak existence, handling the final, heartbreaking consequences of medieval Europe's deadliest scourge. It certainly gives a new meaning to a dead-end job. Sharpening its axe at number 3, we have a dual role that was the stuff of nightmares, the executioner, and, often by extension, the torturer. In a time when justice was swift, brutal, and very, very public, these were the individuals tasked with carrying out the state's most severe punishments. If you thought your boss was demanding, try having inflict maximum pain or death as your key performance indicator. The executioner's job was, bluntly, to kill people condemned by the law. This could involve hanging, beheading, burning at the stake, breaking on the wheel, or any number of other inventive and horrifying methods. Before the main event, if information was sought, the torturer aspect of the job came into play. Using delightful devices like the rack, thumbscrews, or branding irons, their task was to extract confessions or information through systematic agony. The disgusting factor is multi-layered. The sheer, visceral gore of public executions, the smell of blood and burning flesh, the screams of the condemned and the tortured. But beyond the physical revulsion, there's the profound psychological grimness of a job centered entirely on inflicting suffering and death, often in front of a crowd. Socially, executioners were complete outcasts. Universally feared and reviled, they often lived on the fringes of society, sometimes in designated houses away from everyone else. The role was frequently hereditary, or filled by criminals offered a pardon in exchange for taking up the grim profession. Despite the vital, if terrifying role they played in the justice system, they were shunned. Interestingly, due to their, shall we say, intimate knowledge of human anatomy from dismemberments and the like, some executioners supplemented their income as unofficial bone setters or healers, or even sold body parts believed to have magical properties. A truly bizarre side hustle for a job that was already beyond the pale. Definitely not a career you'd brag about at parties. Swooping in at a very close number 2, we have one of the most instantly recognizable and frankly terrifying figures from the late medieval and early modern periods, the plague doctor. When the Black Death or other pestilences came knocking, which they did with alarming regularity, these were the brave, or perhaps just desperate souls hired by towns to treat the afflicted. And let me tell you, their job description was basically, walk into a biological war zone with a pointy hat. The disgusting factor for plague doctors was off the charts. They were constantly surrounded by the dying and the dead, dealing with patients suffering from grotesque symptoms like oozing buboes, fevers, and delirium. The stench of sickness and death would have been a constant companion. Their primary tasks involved diagnosing the plague, which, let's be honest, wasn't too hard when half the town was coughing up their lungs, lancing those delightful buboes to drain them. Imagine that joyous task, and offering what little comfort or treatment they could. Treatments often involved bloodletting, applying poultices of dubious ingredients, or prescribing sweet-smelling herbs, none of which actually cured the plague. Their famous bird-like mask wasn't a bizarre fashion statement. It was packed with aromatic herbs, spices, and straw, intended to filter out the miasma, or bad air, believed to carry the disease. While the germ theory was centuries away, they sort of stumbled onto a primitive form of PPE, even if the reasoning was off. Socially, plague doctors were a mixed bag, desperately needed, yet also feared as harbingers of death. Many were not top-tier physicians. Some were inexperienced, opportunistic, or simply the only ones willing to take on such a high-risk job. And the risk was immense. The mortality rate among plague doctors themselves was incredibly high. They were literally facing death every single day, armed with little more than a beak full of potpourri. Talk about a tough gig. And finally, scraping the absolute bottom of the barrel, or in this case the cesspit. At number 1 we have the gong farmer, also known as the night soil man. The name gong farmer sounds almost pastoral, doesn't it? Like they're cultivating a lovely crop of, well, gong was Old English for to go, and what they were farming was pure, unadulterated human excrement. Ladies and gentlemen, these were the brave souls responsible for emptying medieval England's privies, latrines, and overflowing cesspits. Imagine this. Your job involves descending into pits brimming with years, sometimes decades, worth of accumulated human waste. The stench alone would be enough to fell an ox. These pits were often poorly constructed, dark, and dangerously unventilated, filled not just with poo, but also with whatever else people decided to chuck down there. Gong farmers would manually scoop out the night soil into buckets or barrels, load it onto carts, and then transport it out of town, often to be used as fertilizer on fields, closing the delightful medieval circle of life, if you will. The disgusting factor is, I think, fairly self-evident. We're talking about being literally immersed in human filth, often working only at night by law, to spare the daytime populace the sight and smell. Socially, gong farmers were right at the bottom of the heap, utterly reviled and ostracized, despite performing an absolutely critical service. Without them, towns would have quite literally drowned in their own sewage. The health risks were horrific, constant exposure to diseases like cholera, dysentery, and typhoid, not to mention the very real danger of asphyxiation from the noxious fumes, methane, hydrogen sulfide, building up in the pits. Some poor gong farmers even drowned in overflowing cesspits. Surprisingly, because the job was so unbelievably foul and dangerous, it could actually be quite well paid for the time. But what price can you put on spending your working life wading through the collective bowel movements of an entire town? The gong farmer, truly the unsung, unsmelled, from a distance hopefully, hero of medieval urban living. And there you have it, folks. 10 of the most stomach-churning, nose-pinching, and downright dangerous jobs from medieval history. So which of these medieval careers made your stomach do a little flip? Was it the pea-soaked world of the fuller, the rat-infested alleys of the rat-catcher, or perhaps the sheer, unadulterated horror of the gong farmer's nightly duties? We'd absolutely love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let us know which job you think was the absolute worst, or if there are any other heinously historical occupations we missed. Your suggestions might just inspire our next deep dive into the delightfully dreadful past. If you found this peek into the grimy underbelly of history as fascinating as we did, please do us a solid and hit that thumbs up button. It really helps the channel out. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing and ringing that notification bell so you don't miss out on our future historical adventures. We've got plenty more tales from the crypts, castles, and cesspits of history coming your way. Thanks for watching.